The email arrived on a Thursday morning, and I knew exactly what it meant. Subject line, family meeting important. Sender, Victoria Carter Ashford, my older sister, who only used her hyphenated surname when she wanted to remind everyone she'd married into old money. I was 47 years old. I'd been working at Millbrook Public Library for 20 years, and in that time, I'd learned to decode the particular frequency of my sister's disappointment. This email, formal and terse, meant one thing: another intervention. I sat in my small office, surrounded by books that smelled of worn pages and possibility, and I read the message twice. Emma, we need to talk about your future. Sunday, 6 p.m., our place. This is important. Please don't make excuses. V, my future. As if at 47, I was still some wayward teenager who needed guidance. As if the 2 decades I'd spent in this library were nothing but wasted time. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been waiting for this moment. Not planning it exactly, but sensing it the way you sense a storm building on the horizon. They'd been circling for months with their concerned phone calls and meaningful glances at family dinners. The questions about my retirement plan, my savings, whether I'd ever thought about doing something more. I typed back a simple response: I'll be there. Then I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Because Victoria had no idea who she was actually intervening on. None of them did. 20 years ago, when I started at this library, I was also writing my first novel. A fantasy epic about a world where magic lived in written words, where librarians were the most powerful figures in society because they controlled access to knowledge. I'd poured everything into that manuscript. My dreams, my anger at being dismissed, my absolute certainty that I had something worth saying. 47 rejections later, I was ready to give up. The 48th came back with a single line of personal feedback. Promising concept, but needs complete restructuring. Not right for us. That was the night of Victoria's wedding. I remember standing in the corner of the reception hall in a bridesmaid dress that cost more than 2 months of my salary, watching her float across the dance floor with James Ashford III, watching our parents beam with pride, watching everyone congratulate them on their perfect match. My Aunt Diane found me by the dessert table. Still writing your little stories, Emma? She'd had 3 glasses of champagne, and her pity was showing. That's sweet, honey. But maybe it's time to focus on something more practical. Victoria says the library barely pays anything. I'd smiled and nodded and said something about how I enjoyed my work. But inside, something shifted. I decided that night that if I ever succeeded, I would do it so completely, so undeniably, that they would never see it coming. I would prove them all wrong, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching me struggle to get there. 3 months later, I submitted my restructured novel under a pen name, S.M. Blackwood. The S and M for my grandmother, Sarah Margaret, whose stories had raised me. Blackwood because it sounded mysterious and serious and nothing like Carter. The book sold for $15,000. Not life-changing money, but enough to know I wasn't delusional. Enough to start planning book 2. That was 20 years ago. Since then, S.M. Blackwood had published 14 novels in the Chronicles of the Written Realm series. Every single one hit the New York Times bestseller list. 3 were adapted into movies that grossed over $1 billion combined. There was merchandise, fan conventions, a theme park deal in development, audiobooks that won awards, foreign translations in 47 languages. My latest royalty statement showed $18.7 million for the quarter. My total net worth, carefully managed by financial advisors who knew me only through encrypted emails and secure video calls, sat at approximately $247 million. And every single day, I shelved books at Millbrook Public Library, helped teenagers find resources for their homework, and listened to Victoria's voicemails about how worried she was that I'd never made anything of myself. The irony was perfect. My family had all read my books. Victoria's daughter Melissa had SM. Blackwood posters all over her bedroom. My nephew Dylan had seen the movies 17 times and owned every piece of merchandise. Even James, who claimed he didn't read fiction, had listened to all the audiobooks during his commute. They consumed my imagination, lived in my worlds, quoted my characters. They just didn't know those worlds came for me. Sunday arrived cold and gray. The kind of November evening that makes everything feel more serious than it should. I drove my 12-year-old Civic through Millbrook's quiet streets, then out onto the highway toward Ashford Hills, where my sister lived in a house that looked like it had been designed to intimidate visitors. The estate sat on 5 acres of professionally landscaped perfection. Even in late autumn, everything looked calculated and expensive. I pulled into the circular driveway behind Dylan's new Tesla, a college graduation gift that cost more than I'd earned in my first 5 years at the library. Victoria opened the door before I could knock. She was dressed in what I recognized as casual rich person clothes, cashmere and tailor pants that probably cost $800. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were doing that thing where they assessed and found me wanting. "Emma, thank you for coming." She pulled me into a hug that smelled like expensive perfume. "Everyone's here. We're just setting up in the living room." Everyone. That meant this was bigger than I thought. I followed her through the marble foyer into the living room, where my worst suspicions were confirmed. My parents sat on the leather sofa, looking uncomfortable. James stood by the fireplace in his standard uniform of golf shirt and khakis, checking his phone. Dylan was sprawled in an armchair, and Melissa, home from college, perched on the arm beside him. But it was the laptop connected to the large TV screen that made my stomach drop. Victoria had made a presentation. "Emma, sit here." Victoria gestured to the chair facing the TV. "The defendant's chair. Can I get you anything? Water? Wine? I'm Fine." I sat, letting my worn canvas bag rest against my leg. Inside it was my phone, my lifeline to the truth they were about to stumble into. "Well," Victoria took a breath, glancing at James, who nodded encouragement. "I know this feels formal, but we wanted to do this properly. Emma, we love you. You know that, right?" The classic intervention opening. I nodded. "And because we love you," she continued, clicking her laptop, "we've been concerned. We've watched you spend 20 years in the same position at the library, living in the same small apartment, driving the same old car." The TV screen lit up with a slide that read, "Emma's Future, a Family Discussion." I almost laughed. She'd actually titled it. "Now, before you get defensive," my mother interjected softly, "we're not criticizing your choices. The library is wonderful. You've always loved books." "But Mom," Victoria cut in smoothly, advancing to the next slide, "loving something isn't enough if it's not providing financial security." The new slide showed a bar graph comparing salaries. Mine versus Victoria's versus national average professional income. My bar was considerably shorter. "We did some research," James said, speaking for the first time. His voice had that particular tone of someone who thought research meant spending 15 minutes on Google. "Librarians in your position top out around $52,000 annually. You're 47, Emma. Your retirement savings must be minimal." He wasn't wrong about my librarian's salary. What he didn't know was that I'd never touched it. Every paycheck for 20 years had gone straight into a separate account I used for basic living expenses and maintaining my cover. My real money lived elsewhere, growing, compounding, being managed by people who specialized in making wealth invisible. "We're worried," my father added. He looked genuinely distressed, which was somehow worse than Victoria's intervention theater. "What happens when you can't work anymore?" Victoria clicked to the next slide. Potential career paths for Emma. Underneath were bullet points suggesting coding boot camps, real estate licensing, corporate training positions, even going back to school for a master's degree in library science. "James has connections at several tech companies," Victoria continued brightly. "They're always looking for people to train in project management. The money is significantly better, and at your age, you could still have a solid 15 years to build real savings." At your age. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Dylan shifted in his chair. "And Emma, I don't mean this in a bad way, but don't you ever feel like you're stuck? Like everyone else is moving forward and you're just there?" Something in his voice made me look at him carefully. He wasn't being cruel. He genuinely didn't understand how someone could be content with what appeared to be so little. "I mean," he continued, warming to his subject, "you're smart. You've read everything. You could do so much more than shelve books and help kids with their homework." "Dylan," Melissa said quietly, "that's rude." It's not rude if it's true, he shot back. Mom's just trying to help. We all are. And Emma, don't you want to be successful? Don't you want to have something to show for your life? The room went very quiet. My mother made a small distressed sound. Victoria looked torn between defending her son and apologizing for him. James cleared his throat. But I just looked at Dylan, this 19-year-old kid who'd spent his entire life swimming in inherited wealth, wearing a t-shirt featuring the crest from the Chronicles of the Written Realm, my crest, my world, my success, and I thought, now, this is the moment. Before I respond to all of this, I said calmly, reaching for my bag, I need to show you something. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The one linked to my primary investment account, the one managed by Whitmore Financial Group under my real name. I'd set this up 2 years ago, specifically for this purpose, knowing eventually this moment would come. I unlocked the screen, navigated to the account summary, and held it up so everyone could see. The number displayed clearly, $247,438,629.17. But before I tell you how they reacted, if you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We bring you the most satisfying revenge stories every week. Stories about people who were underestimated and came out on top. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Nobody spoke. Dylan leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Melissa's mouth dropped open. James actually stepped closer, as if proximity would help him understand what he was seeing. That's... Victoria's voice came out strangled. Emma, what is that? Is that a mistake? Some kind of error? It's my current net worth, I said, keeping my voice level. Give or take a few $100,000, depending on the market. My father shook his head slowly. Emma, that's not funny. It's not a joke, Dad. I navigated to the account details, showing the transaction history. Royalty payments from Blackwood Literary Holdings. Film rights revenue from Summit Entertainment. Merchandise licensing from Warner Media. The numbers scrolled past, each one large enough to make their intervention presentation look like a child's crayon drawing. I don't understand, my mother whispered. Where did this come from? I looked at each of them in turn, these people who'd loved me and pitied me and tried to fix me for 2 decades. Then I looked at Dylan's t-shirt again, at the symbol of the Archivists Guild emblazoned across his chest. Do you know who S.M. Blackwood is? I asked him. He blinked, confused by the subject change. Yeah, obviously. The author of the Chronicles series. The greatest fantasy writer of our generation. He said it with the absolute certainty of a fan who'd spent thousands of hours in those worlds. Right? I pulled up another app on my phone, this one showing my author dashboard from Blackwood Publishing. Real-time sales data, review aggregations, social media mentions. S.M. Blackwood has published 14 novels. 3 have been adapted into major motion pictures. The series has sold 87 million copies worldwide. There's a theme park attraction opening next year at Universal Studios. And Emma, why are you talking about S.M. Blackwood? Melissa asked, but her voice had changed. She was putting pieces together, and her face had gone pale. Because, I said quietly, I am S.M. Blackwood. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. The ripples spread slowly, each of them processing at different speeds. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. This is exactly the kind of story we share here. People who secretly built empires while everyone doubted them. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Victoria laughed. It came out sharp and disbelieving. Emma, come on. This isn't... I opened my email app and pulled up the thread with my editor at Blackwood Publishing. 53 messages about the final manuscript for Book 15, which I'd submitted 3 weeks ago. I held up the phone so she could read the sender name. Emma Carter, with a signature block underneath. S.M. Blackwood, author of the Chronicles of the Written Realm. Oh my God, Melissa breathed. You wrote the Archivist's Creed. You wrote the Battle of the Forbidden Library. You created Magistrate Darkwind and the Whole. She stopped, unable to continue. Dylan was shaking his head mechanically. No way. S.M. Blackwood is like this mysterious genius who nobody knows anything about. There are entire forums dedicated to figuring out who they are. He stopped, perhaps realizing how he was about to finish that sentence. You're just a librarian. I started writing the first book 20 years ago, I said, and my voice was steady even though my heart was racing. Right after Victoria's wedding, actually, I submitted it under a pen name because I wanted to succeed on my own terms, without family connections or expectations or anyone watching me struggle. James had sat down heavily on the sofa. The movies, he said faintly. I took Dylan to see Shadows over Cindermore 3 times. You wrote that. I wrote all of it. Every word, every character, every twist. The screenplay too, though they changed some things in adaptation. I pulled up my IMDb page, showing my credit as screenwriter and executive producer. I've been living off these royalties for 18 years. The library job is just something I do because I love it, because those kids who come in looking for books deserve someone who understands what reading can mean. The money isn't why I do anything. My mother had tears streaming down her face. Emma, why didn't you tell us? It was the question I'd been waiting for, and I'd thought about the answer for years. Because the moment I told you, everything would change. You'd see me differently, treat me differently. I'd never know if you respected me or my bank account. I looked at Victoria. You spent 20 years feeling sorry for me, making slideshows about my career trajectory. And the whole time, your daughter has been sleeping under a blanket featuring characters I created. Dylan has been wearing my merchandise. You've all been consuming my imagination while pitying my life. That's not fair, Victoria said, but her voice was weak. Isn't it? I stood up, and suddenly I was the tallest person in the room. Tonight you called me here to tell me I was wasting my life. That at my age, I needed to get serious about my future. You made graphs comparing my salary to yours, James, as if income was the only measure of worth. And Dylan, I turned to my nephew. You asked me if I ever felt stuck, if I ever wanted to be successful. He couldn't meet my eyes. I'm successful. I've been successful for 2 decades. I just didn't need anyone to know about it. Success isn't about impressing your family or having the biggest house or driving the newest car. It's about building something that matters, something that lasts. I've created worlds that millions of people love. I've employed hundreds of people through movie productions and publishing ventures. I've funded literacy programs in 40 states through anonymous donations. And I did it all while shelving books and helping teenagers find the right story at the right time. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't shock anymore. It was something closer to shame. Emma, my father said finally, I don't know what to say. We've been so blind. You saw what I showed you. I said more gently. I chose to be invisible. That's on me too. But tonight, when you all sat here with your intervention and your career path suggestions and your pity, I realized I was tired of hiding. Tired of letting you think I was someone who needed saving when I've been saving myself all along. Victoria had tears on her face now, her perfect makeup running slightly. I thought I was helping. I thought you were too proud to ask for support. I didn't need support. I needed you to trust that I knew what I was doing with my life. I softened my voice. Vic, I love you. I love all of you. But love isn't the same as respect. You love me enough to worry about me, but you didn't respect me enough to believe I had it figured out. Will you forgive us? My mother asked. Please, Emma. We were so wrong. I looked at each of them. My parents, genuinely distressed at having misjudged their daughter so completely. James, still looking shell-shocked, his entire worldview of success and status being recalibrated in real time. Melissa, who'd always been kinder than the rest, looking at me like I was someone she'd just met. And Dylan, young enough that this might actually teach him something about assumptions and humility. And Victoria, my sister, who'd spent our entire adult lives believing she was the successful one, the one who'd done everything right. She was crying openly now, and I could see the exact moment she understood what this meant. That while she'd been building a life designed to look impressive, I'd been building something real. Of course I forgive you, I said. But things have to change. No more interventions. No more pity. No more suggestions about what I should do with my life. I'm not the family charity case. I never was. Never again, Victoria promised. Emma, I swear. Well, she stopped, overwhelmed. I think, James said carefully, we owe you more than an apology. We owe you some serious respect. He looked at Dylan. All of us do. Dylan nodded mutely. Then, suddenly, He stood and crossed to where I stood. Before I could react, he hugged me. Tight and genuine and nothing like the distant acknowledgments he'd given me for years. "I'm sorry, Aunt Emma," he said into my shoulder. "I've been such an entitled jerk. You're literally my favorite author, and I didn't even know. I've been wearing your stories and judging your life, and I'm so sorry." I hug him back. "You're 19. You're supposed to be a little entitled and clueless. But now you know better." "Now I know better," he agreed. The rest of the evening unfolded in surreal layers. They want to know everything. How did I write while working full-time? Where did the ideas come from? Had I really been to the movie premieres? Did I know the actors? What happened at the theme park meetings? I answered what I could, but mostly I watched them recalibrate. Watched Victoria's presentation still glowing on the TV screen, now looking like a relic from a different universe. Watched my parents puzzle through every family gathering, every holiday, every casual dismissal, now understanding what had really been happening. The literary awards ceremony 3 years ago, my mother said suddenly, when S.M. Blackwood won the Nebula and didn't show up to accept. "That was you." "I was at Melissa's high school graduation," I said. I'd already RSVP'd no, but yes. "That was me. You chose my graduation over a Nebula award?" Melissa's voice cracked. "Of course I did. You're my niece." The award was just a statue, though I'd asked them to mail it, and it sat on my bookshelf at home next to the Hugo and the 3 Locus Awards and the honorary doctorate from Stanford that nobody knew about. We talked until nearly midnight. Not intervention anymore, but something closer to discovery. They were meeting me for the first time, and I was letting them. Not all of me, not yet, but enough that the distance between us could start to close. As I was leaving, Victoria walked me to my car. The November air was cold and sharp, and our breath made clouds in the security lights illuminating the driveway. "Emma," she said, "that presentation. I'm so embarrassed I could die." "Don't be. You were trying to help with the information you had. But I should have asked. Should have trusted you." She paused. "Why did you really tell us tonight? You could have kept the secret forever." I thought about that. Because Dylan asked me if I ever wanted to be successful. And I realized that if my own nephew thought I'd wasted my life, then maybe the secret wasn't protecting me anymore. Maybe it was just isolating me. She nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "Now." I unlocked my 12-year-old Civic, the one I'd kept because it ran fine and I liked it. "Now you stop making presentations about my life. Now we try being a family who doesn't measure each other by salary and square footage. Now you trust that people contain multitudes, and the ones who look smallest might actually be giants. You're not going to quit the library?" I laughed. "God, no. I love that job. Those kids need someone who gets it, who understands that books aren't just things on shelves, but doorways to different lives. Plus, where else would I get material? Half my characters are based on the people I meet there." Victoria hugged me then, really hugged me, without the careful air-kiss distance she'd maintained for years. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I should have said that 2 decades ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm so incredibly proud of you." I drove home through quiet streets, past houses where people slept and dreamed, past the darkened library where I'd spend tomorrow helping patrons and writing Chapter 17 of Book 15 on my lunch break. My phone buzzed with texts from the family group chat that had been silent for months, but was now exploding with messages. "Dylan, Aunt Emma is literally the coolest person I know, and I've been an idiot." "Melissa, Mom just told me Aunt E funded my college trust fund." "Aunt Emma what?" "My father. So proud, sweetheart. Your grandmother would be too." "Victoria, family dinner next week? My place? But you're cooking." "Apparently, I need to learn what humble pie tastes like." I smiled and kept driving. The revelation had changed everything and nothing. I was still Emma Carter, librarian, sister, aunt, daughter. But now they knew I was also S.M. Blackwood, creator of worlds, architect of dreams, someone who'd proven that success doesn't require an audience. 3 months later, I published Book 15, The Silent Archivist. It was dedicated to my family, who learned to see what was hidden in plain sight. It debuted at #1. Dylan got a job at a bookstore and started writing his own fantasy novel. He sent me chapters to review, and I gave him honest feedback the way my grandmother had given me. He'd probably never be published, but he was learning that creating something matters more than consuming it. Melissa switched her major from business to creative writing. Victoria pretended to be supportive while secretly panicking about career prospects, but she was trying. My parents started volunteering at the library on Saturdays, reading to children in a program I'd funded anonymously years ago, but that they now knew was mine. Watching my father in the children's section, doing silly voices for picture books, I realized he was finally seeing me clearly. And Victoria? She took down her presentation from the family computer and started asking me questions. Real questions about my process and my choices and what I'd learned. One Tuesday over coffee, she admitted she'd always wanted to write, but had convinced herself it wasn't practical. It's never too late, I told her. You just have to decide if you're writing for yourself or for everyone else. How did you do it? She asked. How did you not care what we thought? I cared, I admitted. I cared so much it hurt. But I cared more about the work than about proving anything. The books mattered more than the recognition. Once you get that right, everything else falls into place. She nodded slowly. I've spent my whole life building something that looks successful. You spent yours building something that is successful. There's a difference, isn't there? There's a difference, I agreed. That night, I went back to my apartment, the same small space I'd lived in for 15 years. I could afford any house I wanted, but this place held my best work. Every book had been written here, in this chair at this desk, looking out these windows at ordinary lives unfolding below. Success, I'd learned, wasn't about having the biggest house or the newest car or impressing your family. It was about building something that mattered to you, something that would outlast you. It was about helping people find their own doors to other worlds, whether through books you wrote or books you helped them discover. My name is Emma Carter. I'm a librarian and a best-selling author and living proof that being underestimated can be the greatest gift. When nobody expects you to succeed, every victory is purely yours. Some people need an audience to feel successful. I needed 20 years of silence to build something extraordinary. Both are valid. But if you're reading this, hiding your light because you're afraid of judgment or because you're not ready to share, know this. Your secret success is still success. The work matters more than the recognition. And someday, when you're ready, you can show them exactly who you've been all along. Stay humble. Know your worth. Build your empire in silence, and let your work speak when the time is right. The greatest victories are the ones nobody saw coming. And the sweetest moment isn't the revelation itself, but watching people realize they'd underestimated you for years while you were busy building something they couldn't even imagine. Write your own story. Live your own life. Success isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about creating something that matters, even if only you know it exists. Especially if only you know it exists. At least, until the day you decide to tell them.